The sound of my ribs cracking was audible over 23,000 screaming spectators. I heard it, a sharp, wet snap that seemed to echo through Frontier Park as Thunder Creek's 2,000-pound frame came down on my chest like a sledgehammer. The arena fence had caught me wrong, my back twisted at an impossible angle, and now this massive Brahma bull was using my broken body as his personal launching pad back to his feet. Blood filled my mouth instantly, the metallic taste mixing with arena dirt as I tried to breathe and found nothing but fire in my lungs. Through the haze of shock and pain, I could see the horrified faces in the crowd. Children crying, adults covering their mouths in disbelief. My girlfriend Sarah somewhere in Section 12 probably screaming my name, though I couldn't hear her over the roaring in my ears. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. 3 minutes earlier, I'd been Jake Morrison, professional bull rider, sitting on top of the world with a real shot at winning the richest rodeo in America. Now I was something else entirely. A broken man lying in Wyoming dirt, feeling warm wetness spreading beneath my protective vest while medical personnel sprinted across the arena toward my motionless form. Dr. Patricia Reeves reached me first, her 20 years of emergency medicine kicking in as she assessed what she was seeing. My left leg was bent at an angle that made her stomach turn, the femur clearly snapped above the knee. Blood was pooling around my head from where Thunder Creek's hoof had grazed my skull, tearing through my helmet and opening a gash that would require 37 stitches. But it was my chest that concerned her most. The way it rose and fell in shallow, desperate gasps suggested internal injuries that could kill me before they got me to Cheyenne Regional Medical Center. "We need a backboard and we need it now," she shouted to her team, her voice cutting through the stunned silence that had fallen over the arena. The crowd's earlier enthusiasm had transformed into something else, a collective holding of breath as they witnessed what might be a man's final moments. Thunder Creek had been corralled by the pickup men, those unsung heroes who risked their own safety to control dangerous bulls after riders dismounted or were thrown. The massive animal showed no awareness of the destruction he'd caused. To him, this had simply been another 8-second battle for dominance, the kind he'd been bred and trained for since birth. Bulls weren't malicious creatures. They were simply following millions of years of evolutionary programming that told them to eliminate threats through superior force. Sarah Chun had vaulted over 3 rows of spectators to reach the arena barrier, her veterinary training warring with her emotional investment in the broken man lying 40 feet away. She could see the unnatural angles of his body, the way his chest moved in those telltale shallow breaths that suggested pneumothorax or worse. As a vet student, she'd seen enough trauma to recognize when an animal, or person, was fighting for their life. "Jake!" she screamed, though arena security was already moving to prevent spectators from entering the dirt. "Jake, can you hear me?" But I couldn't hear much of anything by then. The world had narrowed to a tunnel of pain and confusion, my brain struggling to process the catastrophic signals it was receiving from various parts of my body. I knew I was hurt, badly hurt, but the full extent wouldn't become clear until much later, in a sterile hospital room where machines would beep out the rhythm of my uncertain future. Marcus Webb, my riding coach and mentor, stood frozen at Chute 5 where this nightmare had begun less than 10 seconds earlier. He'd been coaching bull riders for 30 years, had seen his share of wrecks and injuries, but nothing quite like this. The way Jake had hit that fence, the sickening thud of Thunder Creek's hooves making contact, it would replay in Marcus's mind for months to come, a brutal reminder of how quickly everything could change in professional rodeo. The paramedics worked with practiced efficiency, their hands steady despite the magnitude of what they were treating. For lines went in, oxygen flowed, and my vital signs were relayed to the trauma team at the hospital, who were already preparing for what sounded like multiple life-threatening injuries. My blood pressure was dropping fast, a sure sign of internal bleeding that could prove fatal if not addressed immediately. "We're losing him," one of the EMTs announced quietly, though his words carried far enough for some of the nearby spectators to hear. A collective gasp rippled through Section 12, where my parents sat in stunned silence, watching their son being loaded onto a stretcher with the kind of gentle urgency reserved for the critically injured. The ride to Cheyenne Regional took 12 minutes during which my heart stopped twice. Each time, the medical team managed to restart it, but the message was clear. I was running out of time, my body shutting down from trauma that would have killed most people instantly. The fact that I was still breathing was more miracle than medicine, though both would be necessary for what lay ahead. In the emergency department, Dr. Michael Torres took one look at my injuries and immediately called for the operating room to be prepped. A thoracic surgeon, an orthopedic specialist, and a neurosurgeon were summoned as my broken body was wheeled through corridors that had seen their share of rodeo casualties, but rarely anything this severe. The next few hours would determine whether Jake Morrison would walk again, whether he'd ever ride again, or whether he'd survive the night at all. Back at Frontier Park, the rodeo continued, though the atmosphere had changed dramatically. Announcer Bill Stevens struggled to maintain his usual enthusiasm as he updated the crowd on my condition, using phrases like serious but stable, that everyone knew were diplomatic ways of saying the situation was dire. Other riders went through their routines with less swagger, each of them acutely aware that they were one bad hop away from joining me in the trauma ward. Thunder Creek was led back to his holding pen, where he would spend the night before being transported back to his home ranch. Tomorrow, someone would ride him again because that's how rodeo worked. The show always went on, regardless of who got hurt in the process. The bull bore no malice toward me. He'd simply done what bulls do when faced with a perceived threat. In his mind, he'd won the encounter, establishing dominance over another would-be challenger. But for me, lying unconscious in an operating room while surgeons worked to piece my shattered body back together, the real battle was just beginning. The 8 seconds in the arena had lasted a lifetime, but the road back from what Thunder Creek had done to me would take much longer than that, if it was possible at all. Sarah paced the hospital waiting room, her clothes still dusty from the arena, tears cutting tracks through the grime on her cheeks. Around her, my family and friends maintained their vigil, each of them processing the reality that the man they'd watched compete with confidence and skill just hours earlier might never be the same again. The doctors had been honest about my prognosis: multiple fractures, internal bleeding, possible brain trauma, and a host of complications that could arise in the days and weeks ahead. The television in the waiting room showed highlights from the evening's competition, but someone had mercifully turned down the volume. No one needed to relive those final seconds when everything had gone wrong, when 8 seconds of glory had transformed into a lifetime of uncertainty. All they could do now was wait, hope, and pray that the doctors could work the kind of miracle that would give Jake Morrison a chance at whatever came next. The beeping of the heart monitor was the first sound I recognized when consciousness finally returned, though it took several more hours before I could make sense of where I was, or why everything hurt with an intensity I'd never imagined possible. Room 247 at Cheyenne Regional Medical Center had become my world, a sterile, white-walled universe bounded by the limits of what my broken body could endure. Dr. Michael Torres sat in the chair beside my bed, his surgical scrubs replaced by a white coat that bore coffee stains from what had clearly been a very long night. His dark eyes held the kind of professional compassion that comes from years of delivering news that no one wants to hear, and I knew before he spoke that my life had changed in ways I wasn't ready to comprehend. "Jake, I need you to stay calm while I explain what happened," he began, his voice measured and careful. "You've suffered severe trauma to multiple systems in your body. We've stabilized you, but the road ahead is going to be challenging." The words seemed to come from very far away, filtered through layers of morphine and shock that made reality feel negotiable. I tried to move my legs and felt nothing. Not pain, not pressure, nothing at all. The absence of sensation was more terrifying than any physical discomfort could have been. "My legs," I managed to whisper, my voice barely recognizable through the oxygen mask covering my nose and mouth. "I can't feel my legs." Dr. Torres leaned forward, his expression remaining neutral despite what I was sure was devastating news. "Thunder Creek's impact caused compression fractures to your L2 and L3 vertebrae. There's significant swelling around your spinal cord, which is why you're experiencing the numbness. We won't know the full extent of the neurological damage until the swelling subsides." The clinical language couldn't disguise what he was really saying. I might never walk again, let alone ride bulls. The dream I'd been chasing since I was 18 years old, the career that had defined every aspect of my identity, could be over forever. The realization hit harder than Thunder Creek's hooves had, a crushing weight that made it difficult to breathe even with the supplemental oxygen. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn from a sleepless night in the waiting room. She'd changed clothes at some point, trading her arena outfit for jeans and a Colorado State University sweatshirt that looked like it had seen better days. Her eyes were red from crying, but she managed a smile when she saw I was awake. "Hey there, cowboy," she said softly, taking my hand in hers. Her fingers were warm against my cold skin, and I could feel her trembling despite her attempt to appear strong. You gave us quite a scare. Behind her, my parents entered the room with the careful movements of people who'd aged years in a single night. My father, Tom Morrison, was a tough man who'd spent 4 decades working cattle and fixing ranch equipment with his bare hands. But I could see tears in his eyes as he looked at his broken son. My mother, Linda, clutched a small Bible that I recognized from her kitchen table. A worn leather volume that had seen the family through more than one crisis. "The doctors say you're going to be okay," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. We all knew that okay was a relative term now, that the Jake Morrison who'd climbed onto Thunder Creek's back would never exist again, regardless of how much healing took place. Dr. Torres excused himself to check on other patients, leaving my family alone with the reality of what had happened. The silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we wanted to say, but couldn't find words for. How do you comfort someone whose entire life has just been redefined by 8 seconds of violence? How do you offer hope when the future has become an uncharted territory of rehabilitation, adaptation, and uncertainty? "The insurance will cover most of the medical expenses," my father finally said, falling back on practical matters because the emotional ones were too overwhelming to address. "The PRCA has that catastrophic injury fund, and there's already been talk of a benefit rodeo to help with the ongoing costs." It was typical of him to focus on the financial aspects, the concrete problems that could be solved with planning and hard work. But even as he spoke, I could see the deeper worry in his eyes, the knowledge that no amount of money could restore what Thunder Creek had taken from me. Over the next several days, a parade of medical professionals cycled through room 247, each one bringing their own specialized perspective on my condition. The orthopedic surgeon explained the multiple pins and plates that now held my left femur together, the titanium hardware that would be a permanent reminder of that terrible day. The neurologist conducted endless tests, poking and prodding areas where I should have felt sensation but didn't, mapping the extent of nerve damage with clinical precision. The worst moments came during the physical therapy evaluations, when well-meaning professionals would ask me to move my legs, to push against their hands, to demonstrate motor functions that had simply vanished. Each failed attempt was a small death, another confirmation that the man I'd been was disappearing piece by piece, replaced by someone I didn't recognize or know how to be. Sarah spent most of her time at the hospital, abandoning her veterinary studies to maintain a vigil that everyone pretended was temporary but felt increasingly permanent. She read to me from rodeo magazines and Western novels, her voice a constant anchor in the storm of uncertainty that had become my world. Sometimes I pretended to sleep just to avoid the conversations about physical therapy and adaptive equipment and all the other euphemisms for a life I'd never wanted. "You don't have to stay," I told her one evening as visiting hours were ending. "I'll understand if this isn't what you signed up for." She looked at me with an expression that mixed hurt and determination in equal measure. "Do you remember what you told me after our first date? You said that real cowboys don't quit when things get difficult." "Well, I'm not quitting either, Jake Morrison. Not now, not ever." The fourth night brought Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's staff psychologist, who specialized in helping patients cope with life-altering injuries. She was a small woman with prematurely gray hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen their share of human suffering. Her questions were gentle but probing, designed to assess my mental state and help me process the magnitude of what had happened. "It's normal to feel angry," she assured me during one of our sessions. "Grief, rage, depression, these are all natural responses to traumatic injury. Your life has been fundamentally altered, and it's going to take time to process what that means." But I wasn't ready to process anything. I was still stuck in those 8 seconds, replaying every moment of the ride, looking for some alternative outcome that might have prevented this catastrophe. If I'd positioned myself differently, if Thunder Creek had turned right instead of left, if the fence had been 6 inches further away, the what-ifs consumed me with their endless possibilities. Marcus Webb visited on the 5th day, his usually confident demeanor subdued by the weight of responsibility he felt for what had happened. As my coach, he'd prepared me for the technical aspects of bull riding, but there was no preparation for this, for watching a protégé's dreams die in arena dirt while thousands of people looked on. "The other riders are asking about you," he said, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair. "Tyler Banks especially. He wanted me to tell you that the rivalry stuff doesn't matter now. Says he's praying for you." It was a generous gesture from a competitor who'd spent years trying to beat me in the standings, But it also highlighted how dramatically my circumstances had changed. I was no longer a rival or a threat. I was a cautionary tale, a reminder of how quickly everything could end in professional rodeo. The worst news came on the 6th day, when Dr. Torres returned with the results of the latest MRI. The swelling around my spinal cord had decreased enough to provide a clearer picture of the damage, and that picture was devastating. The compression had caused significant nerve damage that was unlikely to heal completely, meaning that my paralysis was probably permanent. "I'm sorry, Jake," he said, his professional composure cracking slightly. "We'll continue with therapy, and there are always advances being made in spinal cord research, but I need you to understand that the probability of regaining full mobility is very low." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, final and irrevocable. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the sounds of the hospital continuing its daily routine. Nurses making rounds, housekeeping cleaning rooms, visitors talking quietly in the hallways. Life was going on all around me, but mine had essentially stopped at 7:43 p.m. on July 23, 2025, when Thunder Creek's hooves had crushed more than just my bones. That night, alone in room 247 with only the heart monitor for company, I closed my eyes and tried to imagine a future that didn't revolve around rodeo, around the 8-second battles that had given my life meaning for so long. But every time I tried to envision something else, the images dissolved into static, leaving me staring at a blank screen where my dreams used to be. 6 weeks after Thunder Creek changed my life forever, I was discharged from Cheyenne Regional Medical Center into a world that seemed fundamentally different than the one I'd known before. The transition from patient to whatever I was now happened on a Tuesday morning in early September, with Wyoming's autumn air carrying the first hints of the harsh winter to come. The wheelchair was a constant reminder of my new reality, its aluminum frame and black vinyl seat representing everything I'd lost and everything I'd have to learn. Sarah had insisted on picking out the model herself, researching specifications and features with the same dedication she'd once applied to her veterinary studies. She'd chosen one that was lightweight but durable, designed for active users who refused to let physical limitations completely define their mobility. "It's not permanent," she kept saying, though we both knew that Dr. Torres had been clear about my prognosis. The nerve damage was extensive, and while there was always hope for some improvement, the likelihood of ever walking again was minimal. Still, Sarah clung to optimism with the fierce determination that had first attracted me to her, and I didn't have the heart to voice my own darker certainties. The house my parents had rented for my recovery was a single-story ranch-style home on the outskirts of Cheyenne, chosen specifically for its accessibility features. Ramps had been installed where steps once existed. The bathroom had been completely renovated with grab bars and a roll-in shower, and the doorways had been widened to accommodate my wheelchair. It was functional and practical, but it felt like a prison designed specifically for the man I'd become. Physical therapy began immediately, 3 days a week, at the Rehabilitation Institute of Wyoming. My therapist, Maria Santos, was a no-nonsense professional in her 40s who'd worked with spinal cord injuries for over 15 years. She had the ability to be simultaneously encouraging and brutally honest, pushing me to work harder while never offering false hope about what those efforts might achieve. "Strength training is crucial," she explained during my first session, guiding me through exercises designed to build upper body muscle mass to compensate for the loss of my legs. "Your arms are going to have to do work they were never designed for. The stronger you get, the more independent you'll be." Independence. The word had taken on new meaning since Thunder Creek had trampled it out of me in front of 23,000 witnesses. Simple tasks that I'd never given a second thought, getting dressed, taking a shower, reaching items on high shelves, now required planning, adaptation, and often assistance from others. The psychological impact of that dependence was almost harder to bear than the physical limitations. The first time I attempted to transfer from my wheelchair to my bed, I fell hard onto the floor, my atrophied legs folding beneath me like broken matchsticks. Sarah found me there 20 minutes later, too proud to call for help and too weak to lift myself back into the chair. The look in her eyes, part sympathy, part frustration, part barely contained grief, told me everything I needed to know about how this was affecting her too. "We'll get through this," she said, helping me back into the wheelchair with practiced efficiency. She'd been attending caregiver classes, learning techniques for assisting someone with mobility impairments, adding yet another layer of education to her already demanding schedule. "It just takes time." But time felt like the enemy now. Every day that passed was another day further removed from the life I'd known, another step into a future I'd never wanted or prepared for. The rodeo season was winding down, and I found myself obsessively following the standings, tracking the performances of riders who were still chasing dreams I could no longer reach. Tyler Banks had gone on to win the Cheyenne Championship, ironically benefiting from my absence in a way that neither of us had anticipated. He'd sent a signed photo with a note that read, "This one's for you, Morrison. Hope to see you back in the arena soon." The gesture was well-meaning, but it felt like a relic from another lifetime, when such a return might have been possible. Marcus Webb visited every few weeks, always bearing updates from the rodeo circuit and increasingly awkward conversations about my future involvement in the sport. There was talk of coaching opportunities, of sharing my experience with younger riders, of finding ways to stay connected to the culture that had defined me for so long. But every suggestion felt like a consolation prize, a participation trophy for someone who could no longer compete. "You've got knowledge that could help a lot of kids avoid what happened to you," he said during one visit, his weathered hands gesturing emphatically as he spoke. "Safety techniques, mental preparation, reading a bull's movements. There's a whole generation that could benefit from what you've learned." The irony wasn't lost on me. I was supposed to teach safety to aspiring bull riders when my own career had ended with me being crushed by a 2,000-pound animal in front of a crowd of spectators. What lesson was I supposed to pass on? That no amount of preparation could protect you from the random violence that lurked in every 8-second ride? My relationship with Sarah was evolving in ways that neither of us had anticipated. The dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally. She was no longer just my girlfriend but also my caregiver, my emotional support system, and increasingly, the practical manager of my daily life. The strain was visible in the lines around her eyes, the way she'd started drinking coffee late into the night, the forced cheerfulness that had replaced her natural laugh. "I love you," she'd tell me every night before turning off the bedside lamp. That hasn't changed, but everything else had changed, including me. The man she'd fallen in love with had been confident, independent, driven by goals and ambitions that gave his life structure and meaning. That man was gone, replaced by someone who struggled to see a purpose in getting out of bed each morning, who measured success by the simple act of making it through another day. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket during those autumn months, making even the smallest tasks feel monumental. Dr. Walsh continued our counseling sessions, but her gentle probing and therapeutic exercises felt inadequate against the crushing weight of what I'd lost. She talked about adaptation and finding new meaning, about the thousands of people who lived fulfilling lives after spinal cord injuries, but her words bounced off the armor of my self-pity like rain off a tin roof. The turning point came on a gray November morning when Sarah found me staring at a bottle of prescription painkillers. The contents counted and recounted with the methodical precision of someone weighing final options. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down beside my wheelchair and took my hand in hers, her fingers warm against my cold skin. "I can't do this without you," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you're hurting, and I know this isn't the life you wanted, but I need you to stay. Please. We'll figure out the rest together, but I need you to stay." It wasn't a dramatic moment of revelation or sudden clarity. It was just a quiet acknowledgement that my choices affected more than just me, that there were people who loved me regardless of what I could or couldn't do. I put the bottle away and never counted those pills again, though the darkness didn't immediately lift. Healing, I was learning, was a much slower process than injury. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Wyoming in snow that made even simple errands complicated for someone in a wheelchair. I learned to navigate icy sidewalks and slush-covered curbs, my hands growing calloused from gripping the wheel rims through cold that seemed to seep into my bones. Sarah bought me gloves designed specifically for wheelchair users, with reinforced palms and fingers that allowed for better grip and protection. Christmas brought visits from extended family and friends, well-meaning people who didn't know how to act around me now. They spoke in hushed tones and offered help with every small task, treating me like I was made of glass rather than flesh and bone. Children were the worst. They stared openly at my wheelchair and asked blunt questions that their embarrassed parents quickly shushed, not understanding that I actually preferred their honest curiosity to adult awkwardness. My nephew Jamie, 8 years old and unfiltered in the way only children can be, summed up the situation with brutal simplicity. "Uncle Jake, why can't you walk anymore? Did the bull really hurt you that bad?" "Yes," I I told him, finding relief in the honesty. The bull hurt me that bad. But I'm still here and I'm still your uncle, and that's what matters. It was the first time since Thunder Creek that I'd spoken about my injury without bitterness or self-pity, and the words felt like a small victory against the darkness that had been consuming me. Maybe Dr. Walsh had been right about finding new meaning. Maybe it wasn't about replacing what I'd lost, but about discovering what remained. The new year arrived with cautious optimism and a decision that Sarah and I had been discussing for months. She would return to veterinary school, finishing the degree she'd put on hold to care for me. It was a practical decision but also a symbolic one, an acknowledgement that life had to move forward, even if it looked different than we'd originally planned. "Are you sure?" she asked for the 100th time, her acceptance letter from Colorado State University trembling slightly in her hands. "I'm sure," I replied, meaning it more than I'd meant anything in months. "We both need to figure out what comes next. And I need to stop being afraid of being alone with myself." Spring arrived in Wyoming with the gradual determination of someone learning to walk again, slowly, deliberately, with setbacks and small victories measured in daily increments. By March 2026, I'd been living in my wheelchair for 8 months, and the initial shock of my new reality had evolved into something resembling acceptance, though not the peaceful kind that self-help books promised. This was grittier, more practical, the acceptance of someone who'd run out of alternatives and decided to make the best of an impossible situation. Sarah had been back at veterinary school for 2 months, and the rhythm of her absence was both liberating and terrifying. For the first time since Thunder Creek had changed everything, I was forced to confront my future without the buffer of her constant presence. The house felt larger and quieter, filled with the kind of silence that demanded I either face my circumstances or drown in them. The invitation came on a Tuesday morning, delivered by Marcus Webb with the nervous energy of someone who wasn't sure how his offer would be received. The Professional Rodeo Cowboys Association was developing a new safety program, designed to educate young riders about the realities of bull riding beyond the glamour and prize money. They wanted me to be the face of that program, not as a cautionary tale, but as someone who could speak authentically about both the risks and rewards of professional rodeo. "They're offering real money," Marcus explained, spreading the contract across my kitchen table. "Enough to cover your medical expenses and then some. But more than that, Jake, this could give you a purpose again. A way to stay connected to the sport without." He gestured vaguely at my wheelchair, unable to voice what we both knew. Without riding. Without competing. Without the 8-second battles that had defined my identity for so long. The program would involve traveling to high schools and youth rodeo events across the country, sharing my story and teaching safety techniques to the next generation of riders. It wasn't the career I'd planned, but it was rodeo adjacent, and after months of feeling disconnected from everything that had once mattered to me, the prospect of returning to that world held undeniable appeal. "I'll need time to think about it," I said, though part of me had already decided. The opportunity represented something I'd been searching for without realizing it. A way to transform my injury from a senseless tragedy into something that might prevent others from experiencing the same fate. The first speaking engagement was scheduled for May at a high school in Nebraska, far enough from Wyoming that I could test my comfort level without performing in front of people who might remember Jake Morrison the bull rider rather than Jake Morrison the motivational speaker. The transformation required more than just wheelchair accessibility. It demanded a complete reimagining of how I presented myself to the world. Working with a speech coach named Rebecca Torres, no relation to my surgeon, I learned to harness the communication skills I'd used with reporters and fans during my competitive career. The message was complex. Rodeo was dangerous, but that danger was part of what made it meaningful. The goal wasn't to scare young people away from the sport, but to ensure they understood the stakes and took appropriate precautions. "Tell them about the morning of Cheyenne," Rebecca suggested during one of our sessions. "Not the accident itself, but how you felt that day. The confidence, the preparation, the sense that you were invincible. Let them understand that Thunder Creek happened to someone who thought he was doing everything right." The speech evolved through dozens of practice sessions, becoming less about my injury and more about the mindset that had both enabled my success and contributed to my downfall. I talked about the culture of invincibility that pervaded professional rodeo, the way young riders, myself included, had believed that proper technique and mental toughness could protect them from the randomness of violent animals and gravity. Sarah attended my first real presentation, driving down from Fort Collins, where she was completing a rotation in large animal medicine. Seeing her in the audience provided both comfort and motivation. She'd witnessed my journey from championship contender to rehabilitation patient, and her presence served as a reminder of how far I'd traveled in those 10 months since Thunder Creek. The Nebraska High School gymnasium was packed with students, parents, and local rodeo enthusiasts, their faces reflecting the mixture of curiosity and sympathy that I'd grown accustomed to seeing. But as I began to speak, describing the morning of July 23rd and the confidence I'd felt climbing onto Thunder Creek's back, the atmosphere shifted from pity to genuine engagement. "I want to show you something," I said, pulling out my phone and connecting it to the school's projection system. The video was security footage from Frontier Park, capturing those 8 seconds from an angle that revealed details I'd never seen before. This is what happened to someone who'd been riding bulls professionally for 8 years, someone who thought he understood the risks. The footage was difficult to watch. Even I found myself turning away as Thunder Creek's hooves made contact with my body, but its impact on the audience was undeniable. These young people had seen rodeo injuries before, but usually sanitized and distant. This was immediate and personal, delivered by the man who'd lived through it. The question and answer session that followed was more honest and direct than I'd expected. Students asked about pain management, about depression, about whether I regretted the career choices that had led to that moment in Wyoming. Their questions forced me to articulate thoughts and feelings I was still processing myself. "Do you ever wish you'd never started riding bulls?" asked a senior named Tyler, his own rodeo aspirations evident in his FFA jacket and worn Wranglers. "Every single day," I answered, the honesty surprising even me. "But not because of what happened to me. I wish I'd never started, because then I wouldn't know what I